Hello, YouTubers, friends, comparatives, bootlicker shows, desolation, peasants, vassals, melees. I'm Useful Idiot. Today we're going to go to another corner of the globe that most people aren't thinking about, but I get the feeling we're going to be hearing more about this operation in Malaysia. Right now, Western media and Western governments are sort of ignoring developments in Malaysia, although actually a lot of governments are involved in activities in Malaysia. And of course, that's where it always gets interesting. So what we have is another regime that has a long history of being a colony, this time in the British Empire, and a federation of loosely connected states with a few ethnic tensions, in this case between native Malays and Chinese. But anyway, we know that the West wants regime change because we've supported an opposition candidate for years there, and we also are using the same methods to organize a grassroots movement there and a militant movement to undermine the government of Malaysia and destabilize the country. And the U.S. backs an opposition candidate, and he's an interesting fellow because he previously worked for both the IMF and the World Bank, so no mistake who he works for. So that is who we support against the current government of Malaysia. And they have upcoming elections, but oddly enough, now there is a militant destabilization going on right now, just before Malaysian elections come up this 2013. And the most startling aspect of the story right now, why it's getting on my radar a lot faster, is because Malaysian sources are saying that up to 10,000 militants are coming in from the Philippines, a U.S. ally ostensibly. And so we have Islamist militants being shipped in from Philippines and joining Islamic militants that are already in the northern region of Sabah. And these militants are landing there and are supposedly going to launch a huge campaign. And so we'll keep an eye on that. So we should be hearing more about Malaysia soon. And if this is really true, there's no confirmation yet as far as I know. But the other interesting thing is, once again, we see this destabilization and regime change pattern just applied in a different way to a different country. But it's the same thing we've been seeing in Africa and the Middle East, and we're also seeing it in this region, including in Myanmar and Thailand. Same sort of operations are going on. In this case, it's the Moro National Liberation Front, and they're bankrolled by Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia bankrolls most al-Qaeda groups around the world. Saudi Arabia bankrolls this group, and they are an Islamist group, and they have direct ties to al-Qaeda. So this is another factor we see in common in Malaysia to some of the other areas that the United States gets involved in. So another reason why it seems likely we are going to see more U.S. involvement there at some point. As usual, let me give you a little background history on Malaysia. They are a federal constitutional monarchy made up of 13 states and 3 territories. And as you would guess, the territories and states are all an artificial entity, as usual. 28 million people there now. They used to be part of the British Empire. They were formed into Malay in 1946 after World War II. So as we see constantly throughout the world, we have a British colony that was then occupied, in this case, was then occupied by Japan for 3 years. So Malaysia had to go through that, only to have Britain return and recolonize it after the war. But and then this region and some of those states were formed together into Malay in 1946, and then they received independence in 1957. And this is another pattern we see around the globe, and one of the reasons why there is a very violent period in the 20 years following World War II Um, I'm not sure if a lot of people are aware of that, but in the post-World War II area, the last vestiges of colonialism um, came under attack. And why wouldn't they? Because we just had Nazi Germany try to so-called colonize the rest of Europe. So how could all the European powers justify having colonies overseas, having just fought Nazi Germany for trying to colonize them? So, but a lot of them didn't go easily. So there's a lot of independent struggles throughout the world, very violent ones. And that's another reason why we see this pattern over and over again of military governments and coups and violence and riots in these countries in the post-colonial era. But anyway, so Malaya got its independence in 1957, and then the regions of Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore joined together in 1963, and that's when it became Malaysia. 2 years later, Singapore was expelled, and Malaysia carried on as we know it today. They have one of the strongest economies in the Asiatic region, a GDP average of 6.5% a year for 50 years, so that's really good. Mostly oil, and one of the largest exporters in the world of tin, rubber, and palm oil. So they're very good at using their own resources right now. So maybe that's one reason why we haven't heard too much about Malaysia right now, because it certainly ties in significantly with America's plan to encircle China and strangle off China. But as far as going in there and exploiting their resources, I think they have a hard time of it, because Malaysia has already been very neutral and open to Western companies and investment and exploitation of the resources. And in fact, Malaysian peacekeepers are in Lebanon now and participate in a lot of UN missions. So they're very Western friendly, although they have not recognized the State of Israel. So that's probably something the United States would like to see change. So they're an Islamic state, but a moderate Islamic state, and Islam is their state religion. And so there you have a little snapshot of Malaysia, and just something to be aware of, because things are getting interesting there right now with their upcoming elections. And if we see their candidate, this fellow that worked for the IMF and the World Bank, if we see him get elected, we could be seeing some big changes in Malaysia policies, and we could see the need for the U.S. to help them with their security if they are indeed being targeted by a vast army of insurgents. So there you have it. Malaysia, another hot spot potentially down the road. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.